Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the show. As we approach the end of, I can't believe I'm saying this, 2024, I am delighted to be able to bring you a very special festive episode of the show with two returning friends of the podcast. Tim Houlihan and Kurt Nelson have been guests on the show before. They and I have co-hosted various episodes from London's world-famous Abbey Road studios, and they are probably best known as the co-hosts of the brilliant Behavioural Grooves podcast. And not only are Tim and Kurt amazing people, two of my favourite podcasters, they are also brilliant behavioural scientists, and an extended conversation with them is the perfect way to close out the year. Now, we cover a lot of ground in this episode, beginning with Tim's personal behavioural science experiment, a month-long journey to find a new home. It's a fascinating look at how we can apply the principles of decision-making, satisficing, and adaptability to one of life's big challenges. From unexpected discoveries to stressful decisions, Tim shares how behavioural science has shaped his experience. We also explore the evolving role of podcasting, with Kurt and Tim reflecting on their experiences creating behavioural grooves, from experimenting with groove jams, where they jam on quirky, thought-provoking questions, to producing episodic series that bring in diverse perspectives. They've pushed the boundaries of what a podcast can be. Our conversation also dives into how podcasting is being used in innovative ways by organisations. Kurt shares some insights into why audio can be a powerful tool for internal comms and training, especially in today's busy, distraction-filled world. We talk about the importance of engaging storytelling, the need to earn attention, and why corporate communications need to compete with the likes of Netflix, Peloton, podcasts, and other entertainment formats to truly resonate with employees. Throughout the episode, we reflect on the lessons we've all learned from experimentation, creativity, and the importance of embracing imperfection. So whether you're a fan of behavioural science, a podcast enthusiast, or someone just looking for some fresh ideas to take into the new year, this episode has something for everyone. I am so thrilled to be able to bring Tim and Kurt back onto the show. They are always great fun, always insightful, and this episode was no exception. So please enjoy my festive episode at the end of 2024 with Tim Houlihan and Kurt Nelson of the Behavioural Grooves podcast on behavioural experiments, podcasting, and innovation. Kurt and Tim, welcome back to the Human Risk podcast.
It's great to be here. We are happy to be here, or at least I am. I don't know about Tim, so I'll play along. I'll say yes.
Amazing. Well, I realised you've had me on your show a couple of times, and I haven't had you back since way back when. And you've been doing so many interesting things individually, together, collectively, that I was just like, we need to catch up with the Behavioural Grooves gang to find out what you've been up to. And to start that off,
great idea.
I thought it'd be a good idea just to explore what you've been doing individually, sort of work-wise. And Tim, you've been conducting a fascinating behavioural experiment that relates to where you live. Tell us about that.
Well, so we're recording this in November of 2024. In April of 2024, my wife and I sold our house in Charlotte, North Carolina, and decided that we like the area, the Piedmont, the Southern Appalachian area is beautiful, but we didn't like Charlotte that much. So we decided we should find a place where we'd like to live, because I was expecting that I was going to work virtually, and my wife does work virtually. So we had a built-in flexibility to stay within the time zone and kind of go wherever we wanted. But rather than have 1,000 options, we put our behavioral science hats on and we said, let's pick 4 cities that we would like to look at. And we did. We picked Greenville, South Carolina. We picked Asheville, North Carolina, Richmond, Virginia, and then the Raleigh-Durham, what they call the Research Triangle, which is the capital of North Carolina. And we picked those 4 cities. And we started. We left. We booked. We made a plan to say, we figure a month in each of those places should give us plenty of feedback as to what it would be like to live there and whether or not it'd be a good city. And Kurt is smiling because we have talked about this. Kurt, where are we at so far?
So Tim, how did your plan work out?
It broke in every single city. It failed in the first 5 days.
Because
The first city was Greenville, South Carolina, and we were driving into South Carolina from North Carolina. And the first thing we encountered was a 800 square foot Confederate flag. So a flag representing the Civil War rebellion, basically, here in the United States. And it's like, for Katie and I, it stands for slavery and oppression and like the most horrible things. And yet there it was right next to the freeway, this monstrous flag. And Katie said, maybe we should just turn around now. But we didn't. We waited. We got to Greenville, and we had a good amount of time really focused on real estate, looking at places to live, and discovered that the places that we thought were kind of cool in the area would be unaffordable for us. And so we hit the road. We decided to truncate our entire plan and go to the next city.
I think this is super fascinating because you've obviously got you have to start somewhere, right? So you've narrowed it down to the various things, and then it's just like, we're going to go try. It's almost like test driving a car.
It is.
Mm-hmm. Right? You've just gone, we're going to hang out there. And I love the fact that you just go, there's no point in continuing. We don't have to stick rigidly to the plan because that would be dumb.
Yes.
We're just going to move on to the next thing because it's served its purpose.
Yeah. So, I mean, over the course of 4 months, it was 128 days that we were on the road, and we stayed in 12 different places in 7 different cities. We had 7 business trips.
Just to clarify, by choice rather than being thrown out by the landlord, I presume.
Well,
we're not quite sure.
On a couple of them, we're not quite sure because we had so many complaints of, they said they were cockroaches, but we think that they were actually ancient predators left over from the Stone Age because these things were monsters. We complained so much that I think that they were happy to have us go on a couple of occasions. But we tested a lot of different spots, and there's a couple of observations that come from it. One is that I think our gut instincts are pretty strong, right? And it doesn't take long to actually kind of get a feel for, is this more or less working for us? So sort of a thumbs up, thumbs down can happen pretty quickly. And that's why in the first 5 days, we said, wow, Greenville, South Carolina is a lovely town. It really is. It's a lovely city. The downtown is charming. The river is nothing short of beautiful. Yet to live close to that area that we thought would be really fun to live in would have been exorbitant and outside of our budget. So we could make those decisions pretty quickly. On the other hand, kind of really settling in and getting a vibe for what a place is, it does take more time. So after 128 days, 12 different places that we stayed in 7 different cities, 7 business trips, and about 5,600 miles, and 1 flat tire. It's we decided on a little town called Cary, North Carolina, which is between Raleigh and Durham. So it's in the Research Triangle. It's the heart of the Research Triangle. And we're figuring it out. We've been here 2 months and we're liking it so far. We think that we made a good enough, in the world of satisficing, we made a good enough decision.
I love this because obviously as a musician, right, the idea of touring sits perfectly with, he's very on brand. But it's just for different purposes. So I love that. That's very, very
cool. It was easy, actually, for me, from that perspective. With the big parenthetical that we didn't know where we were going. The big problem with our 4-month experiment is that we didn't know that at the end of our 128-day sojourn, what's the word I'm trying to say? Sojourn. Sojourn. Thank you. Wow. English is a second language. When we didn't know we were going to end up in Cary. And so that made it actually kind of stressful because we were never really sure if this was going to be the place we were going to land, right? I mean, and again, Kurt and I have talked about this too.
So Tim, coming from some of our conversations, what would you have done differently? What are some insights that you gained?
If it would have been possible to actually just pick a place and say, we're going to spend the next year in this particular place at the beginning, that would, now, I don't know if we could have cognitively gotten ourselves around that, but that would have saved us a lot of stress. That would have actually reduced the stress because then every other place that we went is just like a vacation. It's like a road trip. But it wasn't for us. Every location was a stressful series of decision points. So if we could have decided up front, look, we're just going to go to Cary, North Carolina, and that's where we're going to be, that would have been much better.
And I'm tempted to bring the peak end rule into play here and say that was your planned end destination for the tour.
If we could have, yeah.
Right.
If we could have. And it would have reduced a lot of stress.
Like the plan you had, did you at any point think of stopping the experiment midway through, going, we've job done? Because it strikes me, this is a good example of sort of decision-making in life where we don't know what other options look like.
Yes.
And we can think about this in terms of relationships. We can think about this in terms of job application. There's a ton of situations where you kind of know what you know, but you don't know what the other options might look like. And so I guess what's interesting about this one, unlike certain other ones, is you could have kept the tour going for as long as finances and willpower would allow it. And you could always go back on the decision and go, actually, on second thoughts, place number 2 was amazing. But there is something interesting about the architecture, because you've almost set the terms of, because you have to pick a route to go. Mm-hmm. So you could sort of look at it and say, well, I guess to a certain extent, the early ones, on the one hand, they haven't got anything to compete with. On the other hand, they're competing against invisible options where you don't really know what it's going to be like.
Yes.
So it's quite interesting the way you've structured this.
And just to say, we didn't, and our last destination wasn't Cary. We actually came through this area. We were on the Raleigh side. We stayed in Raleigh for a while. We stayed in Durham for a while specifically, earlier in the trip. And our destination, the last place that we stayed before we decided on Cary, was actually the Outer Banks. We were on the Atlantic Ocean. And it was the middle of hurricane season, and it was beautiful. And we're thinking, what do we have to worry about? We're that immediacy effect of just like, well, it's not hurricaning now, so why don't we just stay on the coast? It was that. But we actually decided to come back to Cary because of this satisficing. We were very intentional about having a minimum checklist. And so once we hit that minimum checklist, then what are the cities that hit that? And then what are the actual places that we could live? Then it gets very specific. It gets very concrete with what are the actual houses that we could live in that click these check boxes. And that helps us rule out lots and lots of other things. So the satisficing thing was really, really helpful for us. We also used Logan Urey's rule of saying, well, she's a dating expert, but she says, if you plan to date for 2 years and you're going to have one date every 2 weeks, how many dates is that? And then by the time you get to about 35% of all of those potential dates, you've had enough experience so that the next best one should work. And that's what we did. We were on the coast and just said, okay, we've been through enough. What if we had to decide today, what would we decide? And it got pretty easy at that point on the city, and then choosing the specific location, the specific house just took another day or so, basically looking at what's on the web.
Wow. I love this. I think this is great. It's a really good illustration, I think, of taking the discipline that we all work in to some extent and deploying it in the real life problem, right? Which is where do I want to, and it's a pretty critical thing, right? Because if you get the choice wrong, I mean, I guess it's an unwindable decision in the sense that if it turns out to be terrible, you can move on.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, right, it is significant. The environment that we're in, as we know, impacts our behavior. So I think it's really interesting that you brought, as one would expect, you've brought a lot of this sort of behavioral thinking into what you do and how you structure and how you think about the problem.
A side effect from this was realizing that basically for 128 days, we toted around everything that we thought that we needed in the back of a car. And then when we get reunited with all of our stuff, it's like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that I had all those clothes, and I didn't realize that we had all these pieces of art, but there was some joy in being reunited with like our favorite frying pan and pots and knives and things like that. There was some real joy in that. But we also found we can live with basically the things that come out of the back of our car.
But Tim, and again, this is an interesting piece, and part of it plays in from your personality. Those 128 days were stressful.
Yes.
Because you were underneath this pressure of finding this location that you were going to live in for the next year at minimum, typically.
Right.
And that you had a limited amount of time. So I remember when you first started in those first days that you were going out and meeting with realtors and doing,
Every
tours
day.
of the city and all of that. And it just felt very rushed, stressful in various different things. And so again, as you had started, you had that initial idea of 4 cities, a month in each that would have elongated some of that time period that might have allowed you to reduce some of the stress
Very true.
inside of the 4 months that you had.
Very true. If we had spent a month in Greenville, we wouldn't have had to truncate all of that real estate looking and going out, thinking about every single neighborhood. How far is this house from Trader Joe's? It's like, oh my God, the kind of minutia you get into, it's like, oh, well, this house is next to, a very undesirable house. They have more cars parked outside than they have human beings possibly living in the house. Do we want to live next door to a place? So if you encounter things like that, but Kurt's right. We could have reduced the stress level by spending by committing to more time and saying, we're just going to check it out. And if we find in the first 5 or 6 days it's not working still, then we get a little vacation time because we're committed here.
So this reminds me of the sort of what you might call the tourist's dilemma. And this is the classic thing, and I will stereotype now, is the sort of Americans trying to do Europe in a week.
Yes.
Right. And before people think I'm being prejudiced, let's explain this. Of course, in Europe, people have much more vacation, right? Whereas in the US, you tend to get much less vacation. So, of course, if you're going to spend the money to fly to Europe, you're going to maximize your thing. But what you've sort of depicted there is you're going to places, you're running around doing a whole load of things, and then moving on to the next one. So it is very akin to, I don't know, people go to Paris and then they do Paris in a day or something, and then London in a day, and same sort of dynamic in many respects, right? Ton of pressure to maximize that time, which in some respects we put on ourselves.
Completely. And I'm reading Hartmut Rosa's book, Resonance, right now. His thesis is that it's nearly impossible for the human brain in today's environment to be completely satisfied because there is a literally infinite number of options coming to us every day. I mean, every day we would open up our real estate app. There were 5 new houses to look at. Holy hell. There's more places. We have to look at, we have to consider more places. It took a lot of, it wasn't like a finite group that it never became a game of chess where we knew there's only so many moves to make. It was always an unfolding of there's more, or there could be. And so at some point, you kind of have to say, thanks very much. I'm getting off the train. Just stopping here.
Well, Christian, you talked about that earlier, this sense of almost FOMO. What am I missing out if I don't go to that next city? If I don't see that next house? It could be the absolutely right one.
Mm-hmm.
And that just can be mind-boggling and really deflating because you can never really feel satisfied in that. And so I love Tim, I actually applaud you on your satisficing, like, here are the set criteria that we need to meet. Anything above that, all right, that's good enough. And we see a number of these, whether it be 5, 10, 7, whatever it would be. And now next best we're going to just run with and we're going to make it happen.
And on that, Kurt, that's a great note that our minimum list was different at the end than what it was at first.
Wow.
It changed over time because the more places that we looked at, the more neighborhoods we looked at, the more houses that we looked at, the more cities that we looked at, that started to morph and get modified and actually became smaller than being bigger. It was not, I don't think that it got smaller because it was easier for us to solve for, but it actually became what are really the very bare minimum of things that we need. And that became easier for us to identify the further into this project that we went.
I love this. So I guess just say, so you're becoming educated consumers
Mm-hmm.
in that sense, but also better at defining the choice architecture, right, and the decision making processes that you're using. So there'd be a temptation, I guess, to ditch criteria because it's a bit difficult to consider. Maybe there are things that are always going to be subjective and quite challenging.
Mm-hmm.
I was surprised that you said you reduced the amount of criteria. Was that just because the criteria you had became unmanageable, or you just realized certain things didn't matter?
I think it was the latter. It was more of certain things were clearly superfluous that we just didn't really need to have, and there was some of it was sorting. Some of it was sorting out. Like we thought that we needed we have a dog. We wanted a backyard. We wanted that backyard to be fenced. And we thought that we needed a minimum of X number of square meters to fit into that space. Turns out the dog can get by on less. And because the dog can get by on less, we can get by on less. We still wanted the fenced in yard. And we discovered this at different Airbnbs. We discovered this at Airbnbs that had really big backyards and beautiful fences and lovely landscaping, to places that it was just a postage stamp of a backyard. So we're like, oh, maybe he doesn't need all that space.
I love this because I tell you what was interesting about that is if you were talking about a human being, right, imputing perspectives on other people is something we know that, right, it's very difficult for us to put ourselves, but you're just basically, the dog can cope with that. Maybe the dog is thinking, when is this temporary hell going to be over, right? I can't stand this hell, but I'm playing nicely because we're here on a temporary basis, not realizing that they're participating in some sort of sorting process.
Fortunately, our dog was a very good travel partner with us. He was a really, really good partner, very flexible, just really good, pretty much at every turn. We really got lucky on that. On the other hand, he's a total pain in the ass because he's directed a lot of our life to this place that there could have been other places where we could have stayed that we think we might have liked better if we didn't have the damn dog.
And coming up on the next episode of the show, the dog's eye perspective. So this is your exciting show, and I look forward to hearing how this pans out. And obviously, if it turns out it's a brilliant decision, I want to get you back on the show at some later point to talk about that. But as well as doing that, you've been doing some stepping away from your podcasting partner, Tim, and doing various other projects, going solo. The group has disbanded slightly, and you've been off doing various podcasting projects on your own.
I'm a podcast whore, basically. So if someone pays me money for a corporate podcast, I'll go do that. And so I've had a couple of gigs where clients showed up and said that they wanted me to produce some podcasts, basically episodes or, some stories about them, not like an ongoing commitment. This was more like a one night stand kind of thing than a real full on affair.
But you kind of lost the deadbeat backing vocalist that you're normally on the show with, right? And went and is that how you should look at it?
Kurt, how would you look at it?
I'm feeling like I am the Ringo Starr in the Beatles and just get, no respect, man, no respect. So,
well, you can't have a band without a drummer. But on the other hand,
why not? Yes, you can. You can definitely have a band without a drummer.
My point is that it's been really fun to have a couple of clients that said, I've got a very specific thing I want to communicate. And a podcast is a really great medium to do that in, and that I've been able to help them with that communication.
What I'm hearing, Tim, is you like the one night stands.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? Is like, I like the variety of the
novelty seeking.
Yes, there you go. It's like, you're a lot sexier than that guy that I work with.
Just unpack that a little bit, Tim, because I'm fascinated about as this show continues and as yours continue, obviously one learns about the art of it, what it can be used for.
Yeah.
So what kinds of things are people looking to communicate that makes podcasting ideal? Because I think that's a really interesting point.
Yeah. So they're internal communication tools. It's a way for senior executives to communicate directly with the rank and file. One of the things that Kurt and I discovered very early on that we love about podcasting is that it's our voice in this microphone straight into somebody's ear, right? That we get this very intimate communication with someone. And when a CEO or a C-level executive has something to say, and they want to say it on a regular basis, like they have this really powerful medium in the form of a podcast that's very authentic. Both of these were unscripted. And I really like that it's an unscripted environment. And that's, the executive might come in and say, well, let's not use that take, that's fine. We can be thoughtful about it, but you get something that's really intimate and authentic. And it's a way to communicate messages to employees especially in a large organization or in a organization that is spread out across varieties of time zones. That's meaningful to the employees, that they're hearing directly from the boss. And so I think it's a fantastic internal communication tool that is probably underutilized.
Christian, we've also actually, Tim has, brought me in on some of these affairs that he's had. And so we have done.
Does that make it a threesome? Let's not go
I
there.
don't, it's interesting. You kind of think about the thing, but we've also done this where it has been used as a training mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
So particularly for field-based, oftentimes salespeople or technicians who are out in the field and
Call center employees.
They have to go driving between, clients. And so you have dead time that a podcast can actually be really powerful in conveying information, talking through different aspects. We've been, since Tim has been going off on me alone, my company, we talked with somebody just recently. We haven't culminated the affair yet, but we talked with somebody recently about these nurse practitioners who are going in home doing these nursing visits to different people. And they have an entire curriculum that they're looking potentially to bring, and that could be a really powerful way of doing it through this audio-based podcast-like training field. So that's some of the things that I think podcasts are intimately powerful in bringing that ability to have, as Tim said, a CEO have a really relatable component, or it can be short snippet training pieces that can be used when I am driving between, my different appointments.
And I love this because I think I've been looking in some of what I do, sort of say, well, if we think about what experiences do people have in their everyday life, right? Things that work for them in that context and things that engage them. And you start to look at social, all the sort of digital channels that are there, whether that's social media, short social media snippets, videos, or whether that's podcasts. And you start to say there's a whole load of tools here that you might associate either with marketing or with sort of, it's not serious, it's flippant, it's whatever. But if it gets through to people and it's a format that sits in their existing lives, then that's got to work really well. And I love this idea of people, it's really, there's a really interesting comment around, I come back to Tim's house search. And, I was thinking about one of the things in Europe you would be asking is like, what's the public transport like?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Which is, so it's a different set of criteria. So you talk about listening in the car. I would be thinking about listening on obviously being me on the train.
On the train.
Oh. But I love this idea of if we want to engage employees, internal communications, whether that's training or whether that's just sort of talking about strategy, whatever it is, delivered through mechanisms that people are already using for entertainment, intrinsically motivated activities, has got to be a really good idea. And I don't know why more people aren't doing this.
Well, and if you can make it engaging, the value of bringing in a Tim is that he understands, or you or me or whoever, probably more Tim than any of us, but is the value of bringing in the understanding of how do you craft this such that somebody isn't flipping that, skip 10 seconds ahead to get just to the end to say that they've gone through it, but actually listen to it because they're intrigued. They have this element of, wow, what's coming next? What is going to be that piece that is going to keep me on edge as we're going through there? It's a part storytelling, it's part editing, it's part, the overall arc of what we're trying to convey. And I think all of that is a skill, but it's also an art. And I think, that's what people bring us in for.
I love that as well, because you've grabbed the essence of what I think is really significant there, which is this idea that often internal corporate communications kind of assume that you have a captive audience.
Mhm.
Because we've sent them this email, they will read it, right? Because in the physical world, we've got them into a room, so they're going to pay attention to the training, right? Or in my world, we've stuck it in a policy, so they're going to be motivated to go read it. And we know that that's just, you can be physically present, but not paying any attention whatsoever. And so I love this idea of shifting around and saying, we mustn't assume that we have people's attention. And so I think the shift of format forces you then to up your game and to be thinking in those terms, because otherwise, it's almost like people have a benchmark. We know that corporate training is going to be dull, right? If we're dragged into a room, chances are start point is probably going to be boring, right? Until they've brought us in, at which point it becomes dynamic, exciting, and thrilling.
Exactly.
Right.
But I love this idea of if you start to use these techniques that are there, the benchmark for is this interesting actually becomes other podcasts or social media, whatever it is that engages me normally. And so you have to. So I can see resistance from organizations. Well, that sounds like a ton more work. But I'm like, actually, that's the battle that we have. We are trying to get people's attention, and there are so many other people trying to do that. So we better not assume that just because we employ them, that somehow that means that we're higher priority than, I don't know, the sports podcast they want to listen to, or the whatever, or behavioral grooves, for example.
Yeah.
Right. Is you're up against that thing. And so I think that's organizations should be upping their game when it comes to communicating with employees, because you don't by default have the right to be heard.
Well, and the other piece, and Tim, I know you want to talk here, but the other piece on that is that bringing in, the value that we bring to this too, in addition to that, intrigue, the value that people get because, hey, it's interesting and you're competing against those others, is that when you then talk to this, and Tim, this isn't so much in the interview with the executive and it's a free form, but in those trainings, we can bring the behavioral science in.
Mm-hmm.
We can frame that message in a way that will resonate with them more so that they are more inclined in order to act on it. We can bring in elements of, focusing on the salient points that are going to then make it more valuable for the organization and for the individual who's listening, because it will have that component that will drive that behavior that is going to make them successful.
It is difficult. Christian, you said there is a lot of work in engaging employees, and frankly, it is. Not everyone in terms of corporate citizenship is so high that they'll just read everything that comes from their boss. And that's okay, right? That as far as I'm concerned, that's just human behavior. So introducing a variety of things of media is actually a big plus. We find that that first podcast is going to get a lot of listens because, oh my gosh, the boss is doing a podcast. That's kind of cool. Got to check that out. And that instantly, now that listenership is going to drop off because they're like, oh, it's the same old stuff they put in the email. But that's okay. Because, as far as I'm concerned, they need to set realistic expectations about communicating differently with different parts of the audience who want to have, whose preference is to be communicated with in through a podcast. Like let those people self-select.
That idea of worrying too much about the metrics and thinking those terms, it's kind of the problem that we're describing exists.
Yes.
Right. It's not like you are suddenly introducing a new format where there's a risk of people switching off. They are doing that already with whatever format you've chosen.
That's right.
And when you talk about multiple format, I love the idea of if you start, I've always been thinking a lot in the work that I do, both in terms of the promotional stuff, but also work with clients. If you start with video, you've automatically got audio and written. If you start with a podcast, you can still do other things with it. And actually, interestingly, with AI, you can start creating video or for audio if you want to. But I think the fascinating thing there is it's when we think you could start to say, well, this feels like a whole load of extra effort. But I think this is clearly the skill that you'll bring from a sort of creative direction perspective, Tim, is going to be saying, well, actually, let's look at this as part of a broader strategy. We're putting this out to cater for a certain type of audience that maybe whose role means they are sat in the car for periods of time, audio files, but we can also provide the written word for people that prefer to read it. And I think what I think is really cool about this is we start to become more inclusive, and that caters for neurodiversity, that caters for different types of role, that caters for people with different interests, different ways they'd like to consume things. And so I think this is just like a smart way to engage people. And if you're, to your point on cynicism, sort of people going, oh, it's the same crap again or whatever, then I would sort of go, well, look, don't you want them to be critical, right? If you're hiring human beings in the 21st century, logically, you want them to be human. And so by default, I kind of want them to approach the product that I'm putting out there with questioning and asking, and if they're a bit suspicious that it sounds like propaganda, well, I'd better make sure that I'm responding to them, recognizing that that's there. But that's going to be there, whatever format you use.
It certainly is going to be there, whatever format you use. And I think this kind of gets back to my concept of self-selecting. And you're reinforcing this. Some people are going to want to read it. Some people are going to want to listen to it. Some people are going to want to view it as a podcast. We have all that media available to us today, and people have preferences. So if internal communicators are not thinking about the kinds of media that they're using to communicate with their own employees, they're missing the boat. They're not even at the pier. You have to be thinking about what, the ways that you're communicating to allow for the preferences of the audience that you're trying to communicate with.
Because we're used to that now, right? So
yes.
I think what's fascinating, and I think the pandemic probably drove this a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
where a lot of working from home, and where I would say to people, look, actually, your competition for your internal training is no longer another piece of internal training or something else they might be doing at work, but you are competing with Peloton, Netflix, the radio station, whatever it is, behavioral grooves, whatever, those things. And so I think one has to start looking externally, which I think, Kurt, to your point, points towards probably needs some help with that, with people that are playing in that space.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other piece is that when we look at leaders within organizations, they may not be the best communicators in the world. It often comes as they may be really good leaders, but from a communication perspective, they are not at a A-level game. They might be at a C-level game. And by creating that format, utilizing a podcast or some other video type piece, you can help circumvent that. You can raise their grade level because you are the expert that is helping them become the better communicator. And too often what I've seen is that I have leaders who do a fantastic job, and then they say one thing in one communication where they're talking to their team or they're talking to the organization, and then they just blow it because they go off on a tangent and it convolutes the message and it makes everything, people at the end are going, wait, what are we supposed to do out of this? Where do they want us to focus? Because it was like 5 different things that all went across the board. And now you've actually created a worse situation by trying to communicate. And I'm not saying that everybody's that way or that there aren't good communicators in leadership. There are, but there are a number that don't. And particularly as you trying to cascade messages down an organization, and many organizations do this, where here is our vision from the top. Now let's cascade that down, let that kind of go over the different, waterfalls. And as it starts to get dispersed throughout the organization, those messages get interpreted differently, they get communicated differently. And all of a sudden you have, instead of one clear vision, mission, value statement, here's where we're focusing for the next, 6 to 12 months. This is 100 different, pathways that you guys are going down. Because, and this is, again, this isn't necessarily because people are bad communicators. It is just human nature. We're interpreting things through our own lens. And now you've had multitudes of lenses that it's gone through. And so it's shaped differently over in HR versus over in engineering versus over in production versus out in sales. And you're going to have this multitude of different viewpoints that can oftentimes, because we are creating a consistent message that's coming across, whether it's through the executive or however that would be, you're not going to get rid of it 100%, but you're going to minimize some of that element.
I love that, because that resonates with, I was talking to a client and basically saying to them, what you've done is you've created one narrative, which is the primary thing they were concerned about was investors. So they created their investor narrative talking about all the things investors care about. And then they were delivering that same thing internally. And their thinking was, this is the message, this is what we're about. And I'm like, the average employee, you're speaking a foreign language because you're talking in high level, big picture, things that make no sense to people whatsoever.
Right.
And it reminded me of when you think about transport networks being subject to where you can talk about how this network is running. I couldn't care less unless you can explain to me what that means for my train.
Yes.
Like, what does that mean for my trip? And London Underground do this really, really well, where they look at it and say, okay, the messaging we put out needs to be, when you're outside the network and you're on your way, you have more options, right? So we talk about the way that things are operating, the lines are operating in general terms. Once you've crossed through the barriers, then you are locked into the system. And so you're then interested in how the environment near where you are is at. When you're on an individual train or bus, you care about how that train or bus is moving. Mm-hmm. And so you have to tailor the message to meet where people are at in the thing. And so I sort of use this parallel to talk to them about what you're talking to investors about is kind of the network issue. What your employees care about is the train that they are on and what that means for them and their journey. And I don't think about their journey as transporting them from A to B. Think about their journey as they are going to something, right? There's some reason that they are traveling. And so we have to get to that level. And so I think the point there around communication is, of course, it's helpful to say to them, this is what we are saying to investors for those people that are interested in it. But actually, we have to turn that around and go, the conversation I've had with investors is X. And that means if you want to start with that, and I wouldn't necessarily lead with that, I might lead with where's the world for you? And then backfill with the investor piece for those who is necessary. But you've got to translate this thing to make it salient to them.
Isn't the same problem that needs to be solved in a large organization similar to what the three of us are solving as science communicators? We're taking very technical language.
I love that phrase. That's cool.
We're taking very scientific information that's provided with a tremendous amount of excruciating detail in scientific terms, and helping people understand who are lay people, right? So who are not scientists, understand, well, what does this mean to me? And I think this is one of the best parts of being a podcaster is be able to say, we looked at this and discovered something really important and something really interesting, and we want to share with you, but we're not going to share with you the P hacking or the P values or the S values or the D values, or we're not going to go through the ends. We're just going to tell you what it means to you in a way that hopefully is digestible and then becomes something that you can actually act on. And this is I think a tremendous opportunity that internal communication teams have in large corporations.
And I love that sort of translation service piece. Right. It's sort of, you have to have enough of an understanding about the subject matter, right, to be able to understand what it is that needs to be communicated. Yeah. But then it becomes absolutely critical to make sure that because it's not about passing. I always sort of look at, what I do. There's a microcosm of thing where I sort of say, what I need to do is I need to help compliance people have enough of an understanding of behavioral science that they can bring it into their work to be more effective at what they do. I am not trying to turn them into mini behavioral scientists.
Right.
And then that's a microcosm of what they're trying to do, which is to take compliance officers' job is to take complex regulations and translate that into something that is relevant to people in their day-to-day existence. So for me, there's always that sort of double microcosm where I say, your job is to do this, and I'm trying to do the same thing for you with a skill set that you can bring in. And so by default, that comes with, we take things out, we reinterpret things, we find different ways of describing it. And I think I love this idea of actually the podcast really helps one to develop that skill because you're bringing guests in who are deep experts in things, who have researched something, written a book, whatever it is, right? Have some experience that they're bringing in. And then our job as the host of the show is to really say, well, I've got to take that. And even when they've written a book, it's kind of, how do I digest even that down? Yeah. Because, the book is a digest of the research that's gone in that they've tried to, but you want to go one stage further and go, here's something that I can give to you. And hopefully pique your curiosity to read the book if it's interest to you. But even if you don't, here's something you can take away.
I'm curious, Christian, about the percentage of your clients that are using podcasts internally to communicate internally for either of these two things that Kurt and I have been talking about, for either training purposes or for just internal communications from executives?
Very few. There are people using it, but they're using it in very, what I would define as sort of corporate ways. So it's kind of tightly defined. It's, we will do this, and it's very, I'll be honest, very tightly controlled. And the start point is sort of, it's fixed. You know, there isn't much imagination being used it. And so one of the things I'm doing is to say, you know, I think you could. There's just more opportunity to play with this a bit more, but it's a very small percentage doing it at the moment.
Yeah,
and
less than 10%. Do you think?
Yeah. It feels so a lot of them are doing it for clients, right? Externally facing,
sure.
But not the internal piece. And I do occasionally hear things like, well, they're worried about where it might go, right? The if they record it, that it'll leak. To which I go, you have that again. You have that risk with existing formats.
Right.
So,
do you think your emails are sacred?
Corporate, speech in front of your 200 employees.
Somebody's in the back of that crowd with their camera recording it, and if they want, it'll go on social media before they're even done speaking.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very small percentage, and I think it's not being fully exploited. And I think one of the things that is interesting is as one spends more time with the format and playing with it, you start to see what it can and can't do. And actually, there's more can than can't, I'm finding. Talking about podcasting brings us rather nicely to your fabulous podcast, Behavioural Grooves. And you've been doing some really interesting things, experimenting with new formats. You've had some mini series on various topics. Tell us a little bit about what's been happening on the show.
Well, you were one of our experiments on that show. So we started a couple things, as you said. One of the things that we were doing is what element that we call groove jams, which is literally jamming with some cool people about interesting questions that may not have any resemblance to behavioral science at all. It is if you could live to be 1,000 years old, what would you change about your life today? Or if you could travel anywhere in past or future, where would you go and what year? Now, that was one that was really interesting, partly because the guest was so awesome on that one. So
who was the guest? I'm trying to remember now.
He couldn't make it, so you got some idiot standing in, I think.
Oh, that was...
But anyways, so those have been really fun, and we're exploring video first formats on some of those so that we're having video component within there. We are bringing in more grooving sessions with just Tim and myself where we talk. Again, I don't know why people like to listen to that, but supposedly they do. And then lastly, as you said, we've been doing a number of different, more episodic pieces where we have had multitudes of episodes on a particular topic and have brought in many voices into those single episodes. So we're getting multitudes of voices on that. Tim, will you want to talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, I do. And I first want to let the listeners of Human Risk know that if you go to episode 441 of Behavioral Grooves, you can hear Christian waxing rhapsodically about what it would be like to live in the past, and not just any time in the past, but about the time that the printing press was invented. So just want to make a pitch there. It's a fantastic conversation. Back to the idea of the episodic stuff. We started doing episodes because we felt like it was an important message since we're communicating a lot about behavioral science. Where did behavioral science get started? And so we went back to the roots and we interviewed a bunch of people, including 2 Nobel laureates, to talk to Danny Kahneman, who was still alive, as well as
Richard Thaler.
Yeah, Richard Thaler. Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm getting competing messages here, and the screen's getting very busy all of a sudden. And so we talked to these folks to try to understand what was it like at the beginning. What was it like to found and create a movement or something that became, the heart of economics today and influences the way we talk about decision making from government into corporations, all that kind of stuff. So we partnered with Andy Luttrell at Opinion Science, which is also a highly prized podcast in our world. And so we did 5 episodes on that. And then we came to that again when Kurt and I were invited to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in December of last year for a conference on polarization, primarily focused on the United States political scene. But there were speakers from all over the world talking about polarization, political polarization around the world. And we were so overwhelmed with great information that we thought, this is probably episodic. This is something that's going to take more than one conversation. And we ended up interviewing 10 of the speakers and creating a 3-episode session to try to unfold what polarization means, what's the roots of it, and where could you go with it? What can we do about it? That was sort of the nature of that.
And I love this experiment to just grabbing things and kind of diving in deeper and playing with the format. Amazing.
Yeah, it's a fun thing for us. I mean, we love the standard interviews that we do. It is absolutely fantastic to talk to the brilliant researchers and practitioners that we get to talk to on a regular basis. But it's fun to shake things up. And as Tim will tell you, I come up with crazy ideas and 90% of them get whacked in the discussion room with our producer and Tim. But every once in a while they go, oh, well, let's try that. Yeah, let's try that one. But I think it's also interesting. Tim talked about the political polarization. We also then got subsequently invited to another conference at the University of Pennsylvania that was on democracy under threat. And so we didn't do a big episodic piece on that, but we did kind of summarize what we heard from that and combine that with those other 3. So we were a political podcast for about a month, and I definitely want to stay away from that in the future. But it was interesting when it was going on. So,
and I'm intrigued. How do you pick your subjects and things? Is it literally just stuff that you're passionate about?
So I think it's really interesting. I think there's some part of this, Christian, where it is literally we have an interest, we reach out, we hopefully get some really cool people about that. We're being, propositioned all the time. So we talked earlier about, Tim having his affairs. Well, we're getting, all these offers for these wonderful interviews. And it's hard because we have to turn many people down. We are at that point where it just doesn't fit with us, or it may be really good, but we have better options. And so it's a nice situation to be in. And then we will actually be focused in on identifying, okay, we think that this topic, next year we have a whole editorial calendar that we've mapped out. So every month we are having, semi-quasi themes that we're looking at, that we're going to be looking into different aspects of behavioral science. And those kind of ad hoc. Of course, if we ever get a big name or somebody, we will jump through hoops and we will move mountains and continents in order to make sure that we get that person on. But those are the ways that we had generally.
And this is where we're at in the arc of the last 450 episodes, the last 7+ years that we've been doing this, that when we started, we were just begging people. Literally, we were calling friends and family and distant relatives. Would you just please be on our podcast? Because we need to, like, there were some times that we recorded an interview on Friday morning. We recorded our post-production on Friday afternoon, and that got edited and published on Monday morning. It was just zippity doo-dah. We just went right after it. Then we started building up a little bit of a reserve, and the next phase was, we didn't have to beg so much. We only had to beg 50% of the time, and occasionally people would say, I'll be on. It's like all it took was a simple ask, and that was pretty great. And that led into a phase of being inundated by PR people, and by the way, we're grateful to all of them. But publishers started reaching out to us and saying, "Oh, you're a behavioral science podcaster. You should check out this. Why don't you have this person? Because we've got, we're promoting their book, and this is going to come out in 7 or 8 months, and you should talk to them." And at first, we just started saying, "Oh my gosh, this is so great. We didn't have to beg for this interview. Let's just read their book. Let's see what it's like." And after a year of, I think 1 year, we had like 42 books that we went through. It's like, okay, we got to slow on that. So the phase of evolution that we're at right now is being able to pick and choose and just trying to be more structured. Kurt talked about this editorial calendar. So we're just trying to be more structured about it.
I love the way you depicted it, because my show, I'm a bit behind you on a number of episodes, but similar sort of thing where you start off going, well, can I possibly get them? And then during the pandemic, I got quite brave and then you get approaches, and what's interesting for me is it's not a logical decision. So I can get something that is bang on topic that I ought to want to theoretically cover. If AI were deciding for me, it would say, you should interview this person. But I just kind of go, if I'm not feeling it, and that might be just, I don't think the individual would make a great interviewee, or I'm just not, I'm not, it doesn't excite me. I can't be bothered to read that book. Then I won't do it, because I've just realized it has to be something that really grabs my attention because of the time commitment that's involved, both in terms of recording the show, but you have to read the things beforehand. You then have to produce the show. You then have to want to put it out there. And I've just realized I'm only willing to spend that time if it really speaks to me on some level, and therefore it's not a logical decision-making process. And the thing I found interesting was I was trying to sort of codify what is my decision-making criteria, almost like a flow chart or something, right? The criteria, ranking it. And I realized I can't do that because it's got nothing to do, because you can't score these things. How do I rank my own willingness? It may be that I've covered that topic to death and I don't want to do it again.
Yeah.
Or I may have done it loads, but this person for some reason gets to me. And so I was talking, PR people were saying to me, well, what are you looking for? And I said, I'll know it when I see it. And honestly, it might just be that your timing is off. But for me, that's the essence of this thing, because this is the labor, as with yours, right? It's a labor of love. I'm not sitting there, it costs time, effort and everything else to put the show out.
Right.
Yeah.
Therefore, it has to speak to me on an intrinsic level.
Tim and I have both said, we didn't get into this to be gotcha journalists. And so there's this piece where when we get some of this information, and sometimes we're just looking at this and we're going, I don't agree with that take on this, or this looks really light from a research perspective. And there is a part of us that goes, if we brought this person on, we are going to have to be the journalist and really pushing and having that deeper conversation, which may be a fantastic podcast, but it isn't necessarily what we do or do well or want to do. And therefore we're turning it down. I mean, and I don't know, Tim, I will say this and maybe you can be mad, but like we tried for years to get Dan Ariely on the show and he would turn us down. And then he ran into some issues, as we know, and his PR people reached out to us and we said, if we have Dan on the show, we're going to have to ask him about this fraud, and we're going to have to really talk about that aspect of it and bring it in. And we just didn't want to do that. We felt like it's not our strong suit. So we're going to bring people on that we respect, that we have a high esteem for in the quality of the research that they're doing, as you said, how good they are. And so hopefully that comes through. But we've turned down people just because of that aspect as well.
Some of it might be confirmation biased, that we're kind of self-selecting on this. But Christian, you nailed it. If we're not interested in talking to this person about the work that they've done or something about them that is a particular interest to us, then why do it?
Right.
Yeah, that's
right.
going to work.
For me, it has to be something that is unique about getting them on my show, because otherwise, what's the point in running another derivative podcast? And the only way you're going to get to that is if you're genuinely interested in the subject and you're listening and you're not kind of phoning it in or just going through the motions. You're actually interested in having a discussion. And so I've started to think about the benchmark for me would be ideally they say, oh, nobody's ever asked me that before, or that's an interesting question, or just something along those lines that points towards here's some. It's not an exclusive scoop or anything along those lines, but it's just here's something that's different that you won't hear anywhere else, and not because I'm smarter than anyone. It's just because my curious brain takes me to a place that no one else's has.
Why is that important to you? Why does that strike that? Oh, that feels good.
Because I think I have to justify the time that I'm spending doing it, and I'm not interested in. If you were to use sort of cooking terminology, I'm not interested in catering. I want to produce something that is unique, because otherwise I don't want to be derivative. In the same way that I'd like to think that the business I have is not derivative in the sense of, there are other people that are roughly occupying a similar space, but ultimately, if you're hiring Human Risk, you're hiring me for what I can bring, and I'd like the show to. Partly because it's got the same name, but also because it's in the spirit of me spending my time. Is like in a very small way, want to add something that's a bit different, and I also want the guest to have a good time. And I think you can tell when people are coming out with their stock answers and rolling out, and I'm like, I think it's not that kind of. If you want to do that, there's plenty of place. I don't want you to read the press release. I want you to think and be engaged and have fun as well, so that we haven't just spent an hour promoting a book or something. We've explored something together, and that hopefully they've got something out of it as well.
It's funny because the answer that you just gave there is almost 100% in alignment with what Tim and I have talked about. This idea of we don't want a derivative. You can, particularly authors who are on that PR circuit, they have a new book out, then they're talking to 50 podcasts. And if you listen to 48 of them, it's the exact same one. So why do a 49th or 50th? So instead, you should listen to Human Risk and to, Behavioral Grooves, because we're going to be getting different questions and different perspectives. And you're going to come at it from a different viewpoint than we are. And I think that part is having that interest in the topic, having the interest in what these people have found, and bringing a different lens to that in this world. Because, and I hate these, you get a book and the PR has and here are the questions that you can ask the person. And I'm going, I just throw those out, because if you have those, there's enough podcasters, there's enough interviewees that will ask those questions. I don't want to ask those questions. That's you can hear that anywhere.
But that's like an AI generated thing, right? It's good. I mean, Then just stick it. Have you seen that Google thing where it produces a podcast?
I have seen it. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so I look at that and say, that's quite interesting. I'll put a link to that in the show notes for anybody that's confused what we're talking about. You can basically feed it a document or anything, and it'll produce a little mini podcast, I guess, in one of the better phrase. Yeah. And it's kind of cool. But I sort of think, that's what AI can do. We need to be miles away from that.
Yeah. Well, and I think the point that you also brought up is this idea of the interest part and the fascination, and having that guest have a good time on the show. There is something about that enthusiasm that is contagious. So if you show up and are really interested in the work that they're doing, I think that comes through. I think guests can feel that. And I think with that, they become more enthused. And then it's this kind of building loop, which is really where some of the magic happens. And it might not be even that you have this fantastic, new question to ask them or something else. It is just that the interaction that you have with that guest is at a different level, and they feel more comfortable, and they're sharing different ideas, and you're grooving, you're jamming, you're doing whatever it is. And that just shows.
It reminds me of, we had a guest on, we talk about music on Behavioral Grooves almost every episode, not every episode, but mostly with our guests.
99%, yes.
Yeah, it's a high percentage. And they said, we were asking them what they're listening to, one of their favorite bands. And they said, the Mountain Goats. I'm like, Mountain Goats? I'm not familiar with them. Kurt's like, oh my God, the Mountain Goats. How could you not know the Mountain Goats? And
This first time I ever got to trump, Tim on a musical thing here. So
it was the first time, and it was kind of killing me. And then like 6 months later, I met one of the guys from the Mountain Goats. Actually met the band members to the Mountain Goats.
Did you go and hang out at the recording studio just so that you could do that? So you
Awful. No.
You'll never guess who I met hanging out on it's 24
He got
hours.
the one up me, didn't he? Because I knew who they were and had heard those songs, and he hadn't. And now
It turned out that
me.
there was actually a behavioral science connection, and it had nothing to do with the music. But it's really lovely. Like, my life is bigger because of that guest saying, I love the Mountain Goats. And for Kurt going, oh, you got to listen. So I went out and listened to the Mountain Goats. I checked them out, and it was like, oh, I dig this sound. This is really good. And then to think that months later, I ended up, meeting one of the guys that played with them was even better. So my life continues to get richer the more we have these conversations with guests. That's one of the biggest payoffs to doing it.
Well, and to a certain degree too, and Christian, you can probably attest to this as well. Sometimes, if you're lucky, those guests become friends, right? And they truly are people that you can reach out to, have conversations with just on a whim, and you enjoy their company and their insights and everything about them. And that is one of the most wonderful, absolutely glorious things that I never, ever expected going into this. That has been just a blessing as we think about this.
Yeah, I had the ultimate example of that recently, which was I know they've been on your show as well, which is Tim Den Heyer and Ava van den Broek. And I recorded the show with them, and I was just like, it was such fun to record. And then they messaged me afterwards to say, if you're ever in Amsterdam, let us know. And I kind of went. I think we had emails that crossed, because I sent them one saying that was such fun. Thank you for jumping into the spirit of the show and all that kind of stuff. And so our emails crossed, and then there was this offer. So I said, well, it's funny you should mention that, because next week I will be in Amsterdam. Like I'm calling.
I'm going to put this to the test.
Calling their bluff.
Yeah, it was incredible. And so I ended up meeting them late at night, and Ava had just been to choir practice and brought her choir along to this amazing bar, and Tim was there as well. And they did they were singing to me in this bar, and we just had it was like I was there with two long lost friends.
Yeah,
and it was the most. And the really annoying bit is I've got to give them both credit for this. I was presenting the following morning. I was doing keynote at a conference, and I ended up. We finished. Well, let's say it wasn't particularly early. And then I had to go back to my hotel and rewrite because they'd given me so much content that I was just like bursting to talk about, because I'd kind of quizzed them on various sort of, the Dutch are very good at behavioral science and deploying it. Tim explained to me on the show that this was because they weren't very good at following rules, right? So the government has to find other ways which from given what I do, right, is super interesting.
Yes.
So anyway, I've been given this rich degree of content, and every single thing they mentioned, I was like, oh, there's an angle there. And I was like, this is amazing. So I think you went in another couple of hours of me finessing my keynote for the following morning. But it was this beautiful thing that had just come out of me chatting to them on the show. And I'm sure if we hadn't had that conversation, that we might have got there eventually, but it wouldn't have happened through any other mechanism. And so for me, that's the primary. Look, it was a beautiful coincidence of timing. But nonetheless, it was just the engagement and the conversation that we had on the show that led to them making that offer, and me wanting to meet them, I guess.
Yeah. My public service announcement on this is, hey kids, if you're thinking about starting a podcast, do it, because it will enrich your life beyond your wildest imagination. Yeah. So that's what I had to say. Yeah.
Love it. Clip that. I'm going to clip that. Just put that out there as the key
public service announcement for human risk.
No. So, and to just give us a little bit of a sneak peek of what we can expect from the show going forward.
Tim, I'll let you take that.
Well, we don't have any series planned. Let me just start with what not to expect. We don't have any series coming up in the next few months. But as Kurt alluded to, we have a slightly more structured focus as we're thinking about what's coming ahead in 2025. We're going to continue to have great conversations with guests, with authors and thinkers and thought leaders that are specifically in the behavioral science world. We'll continue to have that. We're going to have more groove jams. We're going to have more of these hypothetical conversations with particularly interesting people. We're going to see more of that. There's going to be more video, and we're kind of excited about that. We're actually starting to edit all of our episodes in video right now, so that will become a more consistent thing. And we're also going to, Kurt and I will continue to have more just grooving sessions, just the two of us sitting down and focusing on particular issues. You know, we're in the very near term, we'll do our 2024 top 10 books, which of course, as Kurt likes to say, is never just the top 10 because we read so many damn good books. But that's, that's just the two of us talking about our preferences. And we're going to have more of that in 2025 as well. Kurt, how would you add to that?
Yeah, I think the only thing, so we talked about our kind of editorial calendar that we're putting forth for 2025. January, we're going to be talking about goals, habit formation, resolutions, different pieces like that. Again, fitting for that time of year. February, it is Valentine's Day, so we're doing relationships and social connections. And in, March, it's about, overcoming obstacles, growth mindsets. And throughout the year, we're going to be kind of doing those. Now, those may morph. We haven't done those interviews yet, but, the intent is to have all of those in there. We're trying to have a groove jams in at least once a month, if not twice a month. So we'll have those fun, hypothetical questions that we get to talk to with a fun person. So it's, we're experimenting all the time. Tim said we don't have any episodes, episodic pieces, but we definitely want to planned. What we definitely want to do, we're just going to hold back on, figure out what that is, and we'll just run with that when we can.
And if your listeners want to get a feel for what a groove jam feels like, our very first one was episode 441, and that was in October of 2024 with the great Christian Hunt.
Yes. I have to, I was delighted, right? But I'm like, what a high risk way to start a new series, right? So just let's get him on. Let's get. But I have a theory that whoever it was that decided to get me on for that one was like, I don't like this idea. Like we're gonna torpedo this from day one by getting that guy on, right? He'll take it down.
This will fail. This will just
exactly
go down in flames. So we will never have to do it again.
And we can delete the episode. But yeah. So we'll put links to all those things. We began this special episode by looking at Tim's travels. Of course, what we haven't talked about, Kurt, is what you have been up to. So give us a little bit of sense about what you've been doing.
Both Tim and I support this as you do. Podcasting is not our full-time gig. So I have a behavior change and communication agency. So we talked about internal communication. That's part of what my company, the Lantern Group, does. We work with organizations on helping them communicate more effectively internally to their employees. And as we talked about, podcasts are a part of that mix, but we bring videos in, we do all sorts of print and other types of things. We work on webinars, all those different pieces. And so that's been fun. But I think the most fun pieces that we've been doing of late, we started a consumer side. It's called Behavior Shift, and we have brought out a number of different products that are guided journals. We have 3 of those, 2 of them under the nomenclature Brain Shift. And those are they're daily journals where you have a week with a different behavioral science insight that we overview relatively quickly, but then special prompts within that so that it helps you explore that behavioral science principle in your life. And they're goal journals. So they're helping you identify what we call a keystone goal, and then how do you achieve that goal over the next 13 weeks. And then our newest one is called Daily Shift, and that is more of just a daily, hey, what is the one thing that you need to focus on today in order to achieve that big goal that you have? And that has been really fascinating. So those have been real fun. And then we have modules associated with that, and we're going to do training videos and all sorts of other things that are going to be in the works on that. But that has been really fascinating because for the life of my company, which has been around for 25 plus years, we have been a B2B company. And so now going to the consumer, whole new world, figuring out Amazon, figuring out how to get shit done on that. It's been fascinating. So that's been the fun stuff. I will say that the last year, I think the biggest business to business program that was really fascinating is we did a couple different works with companies who are going through significant change. And so not just from a communication perspective, but also from a leadership development perspective, how do you help leaders help their people transition or thrive through that change? And so we went through with a company, a $2 billion company that got bought by a $70 billion company. And we worked with the leaders on helping them make sure that during that transition period in the United States, they have to go through, they can announce the merger or the acquisition, but then they have to go through a whole vetting process that the government in the FTC, approves it. And that is unknown. It could be 6 months, it could be 10 months, it could be, 16 months. And during that time, the organization was very worried that leadership was going to be disenfranchised and they were going to lose some top talent. So how do we keep those leaders engaged, knowing and living in this uncertainty, and they're going to jump ship because they may or may not have a job when, said company, the acquisition actually takes place. And if so, that job may be very different and it's a different culture because it's a $2 billion company going to a $70 billion company, all of those things. So we did that. We ended up actually expanding that out to the employee base because the organizations goes, hey, this is not just our leaders who are having this issue, but it's our employees as well. So it's been fun stuff. It's an area, again, bringing in the science behind how are people resilient? How do you make decisions under uncertainty? How are you engaging people when they are living in this world of chaos that is happening around them? So bringing all that science into it and making it applicable was really fun.
And I think that like, it's so necessary because back to, some of the sort of things we were talking about before, where there's the kind of, we're putting two organizations together. So there's a lot of focus on the legal structure and market share and all those all important stuff, but actually there's human beings here. And I think it's companies that don't think about this stuff. You're not just banging two legal entities together and sort of moving some robots from one. People will have views on what's going on. And if you don't get it to grips with that, they will fill the narrative. And that might be with a far worse case scenario than you could ever possibly imagine. So making sure that the people are okay as this happens and recognizing what they're thinking and getting ahead of that is super important.
Well, you mentioned, I think, fill that narrative, which is, I think, nails it, right? They fill the narrative with the unknown, with not, hey, it's unicorns and rainbows. They fill it with, I'm going to be fired and this is going to suck and all of these other factors that come into play. And the fact of the matter is, as you said, organizations do really well on all of the legal compliance, the systems. We got to get these two systems talking to each other, all of that. They do a not as good of job on looking at that human side of the transition and working through and understanding the human dynamics, and particularly as it relates to who do those employees look up to? They look up to their immediate supervisor and maybe their team, the division boss, and those people don't have the training. They don't have the knowledge to be able to work with them in this type of situation. And so what we're basically doing is helping those people, help their teams thrive in this crazy, chaotic world where they haven't had necessarily gone through it before. They don't have the knowledge base to be able to answer those questions effectively or to be able to lead and get in front of those questions effectively. And all of that, I think, is very important if a company wants to succeed. I think there was a stat, and I can't remember who this was, from a business guru from back in the day, that he said something like, mergers and acquisitions don't fail because the systems didn't talk to each other. They fail because the cultures didn't work, right? And they didn't understand the people side of the equation. And I totally muffed that, quote, but it was that's the sentiment from it.
If I could just add on, Kurt and I have known each other for many years, and we've done a lot of work together. One of the cool things about working with Kurt's business, whether it's as a retail customer, because the brain shift, culture shift, the goal shift, all the shift, and it is SHIFT, by the way, just to point that out. All of that is solidly built on a behavioral science foundation. Like everything that Kurt and his team are doing is solidly founded and grounded in behavioral science. And it always makes it a pleasure for me to join them on projects, because you just know there's high integrity behind this stuff, and it's well researched and well thought out. And they get great results because of it, because they're using science as the foundation.
Making me blush. But I did, so Tim, on the shift part as opposed to the other, if you took...
Feel free to say it if you like. Don't say it, because there's a risk of me clipping that.
There is this aspect when we thought about having an entire series on like the brain / without the F on the end, and just having all the stupid stuff that we do, right? I thought, I'm like, that's genius. That's, I didn't actually come up with that. One of my team members did. And that's like, oh yeah, it's just one of the things that's on the plate eventually down the line. We might have a brain shit kind of journal that goes forward, or a series of different pieces.
I love that. And I think one of the things I love about the way both of you work, but particularly the bit you were just talking about there, Kurt, in terms of those projects, is that it's that same translation piece that we talked about before, right? So you're not going into organizations and doing that classic thing and I'm going to critique some of the other people in behavioral science, where you see them, it's sort of like it's bullshit. It's literally BS bingo, right? So they bring in as many, let me stop you there. That's an example of confirmation bias. I'm going to explain what that means. And you sort of go, you have to meet your audience. And what they need to know is that you're not making this up as you go along. There's enough grounding there. But by default, they're not massively passionate about behavioral science, because if they were, they'd have read about this stuff. So they need you to translate it into something that's meaningful and sensible.
And the other piece about that, thank you for that, because that is actually one of the things, the way that I look at the work that we do. We are the knowledge base that understands the background on this. Our clients don't care. The employees don't care. What they want is something that, we're going through this transition. I don't want to feel so scared about how to do it, or I want to be able to lead my team and make sure that they are focused in on the work, that they're feeling supported, and all of those aspects. So we'll bring the science in, but we're not talking about it from the science perspective. The other piece is that many of the other organizations out there, and again, they do great work, but we are not going to go in with a lit review at the beginning of a project and talk through, here are the 15 different, research studies that show that we should be doing this type of leadership training for your team. We have that background, but we're not going to charge a client to do a lit review to just confirm what we're doing with them. We will do A/B testing. We will do different things, but we are not looking to understand what is the mechanism of action that is actually driving that behavior change. We don't really care in the end. And B, for sure, our clients don't care in the end. What they want to see is that people have less uncertainty and fear, and that they don't leave. So that transition period that I talked with this other company, they had a period, it was about 10 months. And during that time period, the groups that we worked with, we had one person leave the organization, just one. And they were worried they were going to lose 20% of the people in that organization. Now, granted, that's not all on us, but I would like to say that we did have a pretty big impact on just showing how to do this in a way that is going to be effective. So,
you could, of course, and I think this is a really interesting point with behavioral. You could have made it worse, right? So it's perfect. We often think, because I've been reflecting on this, a lot of the things that I'm going in to manage is where somebody has tried to do something, and it's like compliance, good example, right? There's a risk you're attempting to mitigate, a rule you want people to follow. What you have been doing up until now has screwed things up. Now, one of the warning signs I come into, people go, we have to be careful here, because if I'm going to go mess with it now, I've got to make sure that I'm improving the world. And so, as you look at that stat, it's perfectly possible that there is a world where coming in and deploying behavioral science could make things worse, right? You can press because the same buttons that you're pressing to influence positively, you can do it the other way around.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing that I am always fascinated by within organizations is leaders have the best intent. I have not gone into an organization where there has been any leader who is like trying to screw over the employees and to, whatever it would be. That's not how it works, right? But they don't understand the unintended consequences from some of their actions. So, and again, I'll use an example. We talk communication. We have this company that we're working with. They're going, hey, when you're on vacation, you should take that time off. There is some part, right? We know this from a stress reduction, various different pieces, all of this component. And so that is what they're telling people. All right. VP on this group is on vacation for 2 weeks. What does that VP do? Oh, some news came out in the middle of that 2 week. They're on the beach with their family. They're calling a quick call for 20 minutes to talk about this new information that just twice, not just once, twice. So the unintended, their statement is take that time off, make sure you're getting rest and relaxation. What is actually happening? They're telling a very different story. And we know, what are people going to actually believe? So can I leave my computer and turn off my phone? Or do I have to have that on all the time when I'm going out to work? So, yeah.
Amazing. Perfect example to finish this off. And I guess to close out the show, I was trying to think about what I would ask you both as your thing, but let's just say, what are your wishes for 2025?
What realm, what domain are we
Whatever
talking
you
about
like,
here?
whatever you like. This is a free grooving session. Take it where you want, Tim.
God. I'm going to say, my hope for 2025 for me, but I'm going to answer on two levels. One is for me personally is I would really love to find more clients to do some of this fun work with, because the building the podcasting is just really incredibly rewarding, and it's something that I hope that I can share with more companies. From a behavioral grooves perspective, my wish for 2025 is that we continue to, our audience is global, like yours. It's very global. Only 45% of our listeners are in the US. So it's a very global audience. And I'd love to actually see more expansion, not so much into more countries, but sort of deeper into countries that the listeners really need this message of application. That would be my hope. Turt?
Wow. So Tim, you took that a different way. I was going in on like, oh my gosh, the hopes of my, country and the political aspects that's going on here, and kind of focusing in on that. And I'll stay clear on that.
Go wherever you want with it.
But I do think that there's an interesting aspect of what you're talking about, Tim, that I will align with. I think that there is this idea that if we can, I just want to do good enough work that people appreciate this, and so that the podcast grows, that our work, that what we're doing continues to resonate with the clients that we're doing. Because I really, and I believe this down to my core, is that I think behavioral science has some real value, not just in corporations and in how corporations operate, but in how we as humans operate. The more that we understand about why we do what we do, not saying that in and of itself is going to change our behavior and lead us to live better lives, but understanding that is only beneficial. And if we can get more people to understand just a little bit more about how they operate, what are some of the underlying biases and drives that make us do what we do, I think we add value in the world. And we've talked to people about having purpose in our lives and making, finding significance. And we talk about big P's and little P's. You can have the person who's going to go out there and, solve world hunger, end global warming. And I think more importantly for many of us, it's finding those little P's. What can we do that is going to change the people that we love and interact with? What can we do to help our community? What can we do within this small sphere, this small P of purpose? And I think I just want to be able to do more of that. So.
Love it. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on to the show and bringing your usual energy, insights, and just general awesomeness. For anybody that hasn't come across Behavioural Grooves, if they've listened this far in this episode, they're going to want to dive over there and they'll be able to find links to all of those things, including how to get hold of you if they want to do work with you in the show notes. But all that remains for me to say is thank you for everything that you do. You've been an inspiration to me all the way along and great friends. And every time I've hung out with you, had conversations, it's just been a blast. I've learned things and I've enjoyed myself. But above all, thank you for being incredible guests on the show.
Thanks, Christian. It's always a pleasure.
Ditto.
Amazing. Thank you. So that's it for this episode of the Human Risk Podcast. My enormous thanks to Kurt and to Tim for appearing on the show. And of course, to you for listening. To find out more about things that we discussed on the show, the work that Tim and Kurt do, their fabulous Behavioural Grooves podcast, and in particular, the Groove Jams episode that they mentioned in which they invited someone that you've heard from before, have a look in the show notes. There are links to all of those there. If this is your first time listening to this show, where have you been? But thank you so much for joining me. You can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. It's available on all of the major podcasting platforms. If you like the show and have yet to leave a review for it, please do so. It really, really, really does help. You can do that on whichever platform you're listening to the show on. To discover episodes of the show that you might have missed, there are now over 300 of them. Just visit the show's website, which is humanriskpodcast.com. I will be back very soon with another episode of this show. Got some great guests lined up for you. But above all, thank you so, so much for being a part of the show, for listening to it, for giving me ideas and feedback. I really do appreciate it. I couldn't do it without you. Thank you so much. Stay safe, be well. Let me wish you a happy 2025.